It's really my great pleasure to welcome, I would like to think, a friend, but certainly somebody I know very well for a long time. She had the pleasure of once interviewing me when I threatened that I would go to jail rather than give up the right to cut turf. For those of you who don't understand that, in the rest of Europe, that was me railing against a directive of Europe, if you don't mind. About peat extraction in bogs. But anyway, Mairead, we both got over that. I didn't do the jail, and Mairead went on to much greater things. You have had an extremely full life in Brussels, in the European Parliament, quite a long career, becoming the first Vice President. So once again, welcome, Mairead, on a very personal note. Before I just give you the floor, I think we're here this morning to discuss and talk about your role and the role of finance and banking in Europe's recovery. It is extremely important that Group 3 become aware of what recovery means. We talk a great deal about the social ramifications of recovery. And in Group 3, we tend to carry that very heavily on our shoulders. But of course, recovery in any field doesn't happen unless the financial numbers are proper and correct. And I suppose under this presidency, I really want us as a group to engage in that debate because it is extremely important. It is true that there is, according to the stats, some kind of recovery happening. In June, the Economic Climate Index in the Eurozone rose by 117.9 points, exceeding all estimates. And I think that really has to be taken as maybe a surprise, but a welcome development. But equally, we have to learn a little from the recovery, the financial recovery, particularly of the banking area, because in some countries where it affected the economy most, and I have to say my own is one of them, you can argue that that recovery has a different speed and perhaps isn't happening at the same pace as it should be happening all across Europe. Indeed, the great discussion here is, does being in the EU mean that we can have across-the-board recovery given the diverged nature of the economies that exist within the European Union? Just in terms of talking about, we talk about the paradigm shift. We talk about COVID-19 will bring great change. And yet, I read in an article in The Economist which says the political turmoil that we observe in many countries is only a foretaste of what awaits us if we do not rethink what we owe each other. And that's the thing, we do owe each other, whether it's personal debt, national debt, debt within the union, we do owe ourselves a lot of money. And that's where I think the whole banking system comes into place. Let me make a final point before I give you the floor, Mairead. The reality is that we have to look at our banking systems, we have to look at the alternative banking systems and see what role they play, particularly in the area of small socially minded industries or our small medium enterprises. That is a driving force within the economy, and I know many in this Group 3 have at their heart the future and role of small social economies and small medium economies of scale. So, Commissioner McGuinness, again, my congratulations on you and your role. I know it's a very interesting and tough role, given the situation we are now in, particularly COVID-19. So I would like to welcome you very generously here and ask you to take the floor. Thank you very much.
There you are. That's why I moved closer to Seamus, not just because we're very good friends, but because I knew he would understand the technology. So a very good afternoon to all of you, and it's a great honour for me to be here, Seamus, and a pleasure for two reasons. One, it's wonderful to see real people and to actually almost feel real people, because we have, you know, in politics and in the Commission, this is something we have missed. And I do think that, you know, politics is about people, and it would be really good that we can get back to some sort of normality where we are physically meeting and physically engaging. I suppose the second point is that the topic of today, which is around the whole financial system, is not just core to the job that I do, but I think it is core to sustainability for the future, and indeed to meet all the social issues which this group works on. So I want to say to Seamus, to thank you as President, but also to say that I've met Krista Schweng, your President, and I hope to work very closely with you in the future. I made the observation recently on television that money makes the world go around, and there is a song with those words in it. And the truth is, without money, we cannot achieve anything. However, money can make the world spin out of control, or we can invest in a way that makes the world more sustainable. And we are in that place today, where perhaps because of COVID-19, there is a greater understanding of how vulnerable we are, how we were not resilient either as a society, as an economy, or indeed our public health systems, and how business itself has begun to realise that even if they look after their business, that actually the outside, what's happening in public health, can really impact on the bottom line and on their future. So I think it's been a stark wake-up call for all of us, but an important one. Briefly, when the crisis hit, the Commission acted to stabilise the situation, to make sure that banks could continue lending during this crisis to businesses and to citizens. And we were able to do this work quickly, which sometimes the Commission can be accused of not reacting quickly. We did in this case. We also looked and worked with stakeholders who came together, consumers, businesses, banks, etc., to look at best practices, and that was really important. But we also were real, because there is a concern about non-performing loans, and if they build up in balance sheets, the implications for lending are difficult. And we released our strategy in December so that we would be prepared. The truth is that all member states have given strong support, fiscal support, to businesses and to employees. This was absolutely essential in order to get us all through this pandemic, which was something we've never experienced before. So those measures were important and they were effective. But they will make for lasting change, and we may discuss that in the conversation. Linked to the pandemic is the reality that digitalisation, particularly of the financial system, has accelerated at an enormous pace. And we find that banks are closing branches because of COVID, but these branches may not reopen, and clearly that might be something that you will want to talk about. We also know that there is a generational issue, because younger people, of whom I have 4 in our household, all in their 20s, they don't look at banks as I look at banks. They have a digital relationship, not a real relationship. And this is something that they will carry through, I think, as they get older. But again, that might be interesting for discussion. From my side, financial stability is crucial. So we are looking carefully at these innovations which are positive, but equally we have to manage the risks that can arise from innovation and make sure that we protect citizens. Just this week, the Commission will adopt a Fit for 55 package. So this is around climate and sustainability. And, we will all be asked to step up here. Europe has very high ambitions. We, in less than 9 years, need to reduce our emissions by 55%. This is our legislation. And I think, Seamus mentioned turf cutting, this peatland issue. In the past, we would have supported farmers to drain these peatlands. And today we realise that was a mistake. So we have to reverse our policies. And I think in doing this, if you like, turn around, we need to be honest with citizens and say that, look, public policy in the past wasn't fit. We didn't understand the consequences. Today we do understand the consequences around fossil fuels, around carbon, and we also realise that if we don't act quickly, there will be consequences. And indeed, I think the young generation will not forgive us. So in that, we need companies, both the financial system and those in the non-financial area, to step up. So we need clarity about what companies are doing to make themselves more sustainable. We need to see what the financial system is doing on two fronts. One, to make itself more sustainable, because, you know, climate risk is a financial stability risk. This is recognised now by central banks and the ECB. So there is an onus on the banking situation to look at where its vulnerabilities are and to make sure that these are addressed. I think one of the key issues for me, and it relates to how we engage with citizens, because my DG is very technical and it regulates and we have legislation, but fundamentally we should also be promoting financial literacy for our citizens, particularly in a digital era where decision-making can be quite quick. I would like to ask how many of us really read all of the terms and conditions when we log into a website. Possibly some do, but most do not. What are the consequences if lending decisions are being taken online and people don't have the financial literacy to understand what is behind it? So this is a core objective for me in relation to citizens. And lastly, to say on some of the big issues like banking union, capital markets union, we have work to do. We don't have cross-border banking to any great extent. We do need to have a stronger banking union so that we have access, our citizens have access across borders. We also need alternatives to bank lending. And one of the worries we have is that at the moment our capital markets are not fully developed, and that's something we need to look at. My final remarks perhaps are personal, and I think Seamus will understand this. When you're setting out in Ireland on your first career or as a student, the credit union would be our local bank or the cooperative bank. And my late father would have been involved in setting up a local credit union. And they grew from the need in the society and in the community. And I still have a heart and a feeling for the credit union. But we've also seen that these local banks can be quite big banks. And there's often a challenge as to how you regulate so that there isn't financial risks, while at the same time having an appreciation of the local nature of a cooperative bank and its role in society. So none of these are easy questions, but we have to face up to them. I'll end where I started by saying that money does make the world go round. And the truth is there is a lot of money going around at the moment looking for a home. We would like that money would flow to sustainable economic activities and to social investments through social bonds and green bonds. We want to stop investments in areas that are not sustainable so that we don't have stranded assets. And a slight concern, I think, of all of us is the asset price inflation, the raw material price increases, which we hope will be just a transition as people get back in business. So thank you, Seamus, for the honour of inviting me here today. I really look forward to both your comments and your questions. And I've always believed that for us to make good policy, we need to keep our ear very close to the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. That, again, is, as usual, insightful and getting to the point. Before we take questions, we have two short replies from two people who work very hard on Group 3, Yanis Vardaskanis, the Vice President, and Giuseppe Guarini, who is very much involved in the whole financial opinions. So if I may ask Yanis Vardaskanis from Greece and Vice President of the group, maybe you will take the floor.
Yes. Πρόεδρε, ευχαριστώ πολύ.
We can hear you. Come ahead.
Yes. Good morning and thank you very much. I'd like to pay my compliments for the initiative that you've taken in order to organise today's debate. And I'd like to thank the Commissioner for being with us today. I think it's very clear that the finance system, the banking system, plays a very important role in the functioning of both the economy and society as a whole. It also plays an important role for all citizens and for all families. And I think it's also clear, and this has become particularly apparent during the economic and financial crisis since 2008, that if the banking and financial systems go through a crisis, then that crisis needs recapitalization, and the crisis needs to be paid for through our budgets. But at the end of the day, it's always the citizens that end up paying for the recovery. Now, a lot has been said about recovery since the pandemic, the recovery, the economic recovery, recovery of society, but the pandemic hasn't actually removed all the problems and issues that we've had in the financial sector and that existed before the pandemic. What's happened is that these issues have basically become worse as a result of the pandemic. Now, we need economic recovery, recovery for our citizens, we need real wealth for our citizens and for the economy. But for that, the financial and banking systems need to be much more open and more available and at the disposal of our citizens and the economy. Now, you've talked about cooperatives, you've talked about SMEs, about company confederations, but we mustn't forget our citizens. Lending has to become possible again. Borrowing has to become possible again. And we really need to make sure that our citizens understand the financial and banking systems as well. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we take account of the real situation out there. There is poverty, there are inequalities, there is still exclusion, there are differences in the way people are treated. And the pandemic isn't at the origin of these problems, it's simply aggravated existing problems. So, all in all, I can say that there will not be any economic or social recovery in Europe if the finances and banking sectors do not work together in the interest of the economy and society as a whole. Finally, I would like to say that it's not possible for everybody to pay the price of the crisis in the financial and banking sectors. When we have problems, the financial and banking sectors aren't always there, and they will only accept to support part of the economy and society.
As usual, very perceptive. So I'd like to now introduce you, Commissioner, to Giuseppe Guerini from Italy. Giuseppe was celebrating last night, we know that, but he is very much ready to make a short reply as well. Giuseppe, please come in.
Thank you, Seamus. Grazie.
Thank you, Seamus. Yes, I'm ready here, and I'd like, first of all, to thank Commissioner McGuinness very much indeed for being here with us this morning. Within the Eco section, and that I represent in Group 3, we've dealt with a lot of dossiers, everything to do with the regulation and digital finance. Has been looked at within the committee, and we've paid particular attention to striking a balance between the necessary regulation, but also the need to encourage innovation, and in particular to find a European path for the digitization in the financial sector, and in particular in the face of competition with the US. Now, as to the banking union, on the 16th of July 2020, in the plenary in the committee, we approved an opinion on a more sustainable and inclusive banking union asking for a more responsible role played by banks, as you've mentioned yourself, and to make sure that there is the necessary security as well. So we suggested that there should be a balance between the rules that are quite cumbersome and society. I mean, we have the banks that are rooted in their areas, their territories, but they also have to make sure that we look after society. For example, in cooperative banks in Italy, they join forces in order to support their savers. And when we talk about protecting banks, looking after the banks, we're not defending bankers, we're defending the savings of our European citizens. We're defending the credits that are taken out by many companies and small-scale companies and families, particularly local banks. And one last comment regarding an important package, that's the capital unions package, which focuses on an economy that works for both people and companies. But in the capital unions, we've seen that there's something missing. Not much attention is being paid to capital investments in the social economy. That is an important area. There's a lot of speculative finance that's becoming more interested in ethical investment funds and in the social economy. And that has to be done. That has to be part of the banking union and capital union and of the EU. And in the eco section, we deal a lot with these issues. And I would just like to ask your opinion about the agreement reached in the G20 in Venice last Saturday about the minimum levies to be levied on large multinational companies. What's your opinion on this? And I know it's not really your area of interest. Thank you very much indeed for being here today.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to I'm going to ask you, you're going to ask questions now, and we will take those questions, if that's all right, Commissioner. Now, I'm going to give, we'll take the names of people who put their hands up. Andres, we have your name, Kepsis, Simo, I have yours, and Ballon. I will say, and of course, Madam Calistro. And if Sylvia notices any more, John Comer. Okay, my strict direction is I don't want statements. I need a question. I need it very brief, okay? So apologies for that, but I'm delighted to see such interest. I will start with our Vice President, Simo, or not, well, he's there as well. He's the other one. But I will start with Jan Dix for the first question.
Thank you, Seamus, and thank you, Commissioner. You said in your introduction that your DG is more technical, so I have two more political questions. As is known, the G20 has reached agreement on a global tax deal. In my view, this is an opportunity to take new steps towards integrating member states' tax systems. An EU approach to this tax for multinationals would be a good step in that direction. Does the Commission intend to take action on this? And my second question, a second point that I would like to raise is the often discussed issue of the billions of subsidies that still go to fossil energy sources. While from an economic, social and ecological point of view, it makes much more sense to direct these money flows to sustainable energy sources. When will this finally be taken seriously? Thank you.
Thank you, and that's an example how to be very succinct and ask the questions. Thank you, Jan. I go to our other Vice President who is asking a question, Simo Tianeman from Finland. Simo, please.
Thank you, Seamus, so much, and thank you also, Mrs. Commissioner, Mrs. McGuinness, for being here today and discussing. I think I know you when you were MEP. I was visiting sometimes with you. Well, I was not allowed to put a statement, but still, it's not really a question, but it's statement more this process of sustainable finance. So of course everybody understand that it's a good project and it's a necessary, but have to say that the statement is that this process has not been totally understandable and perhaps science-based, and there are a lot of people who don't understand what the Commission, what the EU is doing, and putting some extra burden for instance, the forest owners some requirements which are perhaps not best reasonable, or the which forms of the energy are sustainable. So it sounds a bit political based, not rather than science based. That's the statement. Thank you very much.
Not bad. There's a question there too, I think, Simo. Can I go to Siv Holst, who has also a question?
Thank you very much. How can we as a committee, as civil society, encourage the choices, the investment that support the future? A sustainable future where we favor the choices which are right for our climate, for our people. A sustainable future where we have financial system a part of the promise of sustainable development goals, including the promise of leaving no one behind. We do need a change because we do leave people behind now. For example, people with disabilities who are left behind by the demand of high digital literacy and by inaccessible systems. And the social economy companies who are pressed by inflexible demands and a tight economy. So how can we support you to make the necessary change, to make the right choices for our future? Thank you.
Thank you, Siv from Denmark. And now online, I'd like to go to my good friend Jurag Sipko. Jurag, can you come in, please?
Yes. Mr. President, many thanks for giving me a floor. At the same time, I highly appreciate Madam Commissioner for her very concise but very interesting introductory speech. As Mr. President said, I am just going to straightforward to the question. My first question is related to non-financial sector. Is there any intention on the level of EU Commission to deal with a non-financial sector which actually strongly contributed to the business, but at the same time is very high level risk? My second question is related in line with solvency and liquidity ratio, and is there any intention to increase or to introduce or to create new financial instrument in order to overcome this problem? My third question is, after the global financial crisis, it was adopted and very well implemented Basel III. So the question is how Basel III in the European banking sector will influence very well functioning. And I apologize that I have also the fourth question. Obviously, I put only three, and that is related to climate change and solvency ratio and solvency II, and how climate change will influence the financial stability and the very well functioning financial system in European Union. Thank you.
Thank you. Good value there. Thank you very much, Jurag. And still online, Branko Ravnik. Maybe you can come in, Branko. Connect. Okay, we will go back there. Baiba Miltovica, you're next, please.
Thank you, dear President. And thank you, Commissioner McGuinness, for being with us today. It is a really great pleasure. I'm representing consumer organization, and we are also part of the BIUC, which is European Consumer Organization, and we are collectively worried as consumer movement about non-performing loans, and also we need to think how to ensure the interests of individual borrowers and how we better can protect them under Commission plan to reduce non-performing loans in Europe. Non-performing loans are legacy of the recent financial crisis and irresponsible lending practices by certain financial institutions. Let me also inform you that there are fast or SMS loans really flourishing. And in the COVID crisis, there are many problems for the consumers regarding these kind of business practices. We really appreciate the work that you do, and I would like to appreciate to get some comment on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye as usual. I would like to ask Andreas Turner, Austria, to make a question.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you to Commissioner McGuinness for having taken the time to be here today. I'm sitting here at the back behind the glass wall. Thank you for having taken the time, as I said, for this exchange with us. And just like my colleague Simon Tilian, I'd also like to refer to current legislation, that's sustainable finance. And there's a delegated act that sets out in great detail what the technical criteria should be regarding as to when a company can be and when finance can be seen to be sustainable. That is to say, when it makes a considerable contribution to climate change. Now, this legislation is currently or has been it's currently being looked at by Council and Parliament, and I come from agriculture and forestry in Austria, and we've studied the legislation, and we found that we have considerable misgivings about the way in which these technical criteria have been drafted. They're extremely detailed. Particularly if you look at the way in which forestry plans should be drafted, and there's a climate use analysis, and the question is how forestry companies can actually carry out such an analysis, such an assessment. And then there are a lot of audits provided for as well. And the Commission has always countered, well, these criteria are not compulsory, they're optional. But we fear that in the future, during the economic process, larger companies may want to use these standards, for example, in their reporting obligations on sustainable reporting, and that those standards will also be imposed on forestry enterprises as well, and that will mean a huge burden on their shoulders without actually providing any contribution to protecting the environment, because we put the legislation into practice anyway. So my question to you, also looking at the future and thinking of agriculture, I mean, for the moment being, the criteria for agriculture are only being drafted, but we have the impression that the sector hasn't actually been involved in the drawing up of these technical criteria. And my appeal to you would be to please make sure that when drawing up these criteria for agriculture, the sector itself, people working in practice, are involved in this. Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to go to Elena Calestro from Romania.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. Do you remember that at the beginning of the pandemic, the IMF said something like, do whatever it takes, but keep the receipts? Nobody said anything about keeping a record on, about where the money is coming from. I had the great pleasure to work on the opinion on the EU funding strategy for the Next Generation EU. And we've noticed that there is more interest on the expenditure side, but not so much interest in explaining and allowing or providing transparency on the revenue side. I would like to ask you, because you've mentioned that it's important for you as well to have financial literacy, but I would like to ask you, what are the concrete, specific measures that you envision in order to ensure transparency and democratic control over the debt management, over the funding strategies for the years to come? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as I said, keep it to the questions. Mr. Kupsis, please, Lithuania.
Thank you, dear Madam Commissioner. I have two questions, and the first is regarding the banning of kickback payments to financial advisors, because kickbacks lead to biased advice that is often not in the best interest of the client. Is the European Commission considering such a ban in the context of its retail investment strategy? The Commission has already introduced new rules in April requiring advisors to assess clients' sustainability preferences. And will the European Commission also look at part of this retail investment strategy at improving the qualifications of financial advisors, including on ESG and sustainability issues? And the second question is regarding the sustainable finance strategy unveiled just a few days ago. In one of the actions, the Commission commits to engage with the ESAs to review the regulatory technical standards and to improve social governance aspects of ESG risk and ESG factors reporting. And indeed, we have to note, unfortunately, that ESAs have done a bad job in developing the S of ESG risks and the factors impacts. And how will the Commission ensure that EBA and the Commission will improve the standards to report on social risks and impacts? Because essentially the action 2D of the strategy only mentions that the Commission will report on social taxonomy. So does the EC not commit to extend the taxonomy with the social taxonomy? That's a big question.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to go to Christine Grabo. I think you are online, if I'm not mistaken. So Christine, please take the floor.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for letting me speak. And dear Commissioner, the digitalization of the financial sector has evolved fast the last years, and the financial institutions that we have had for many, many years are now challenged by new innovative actors such as fintech startups. They are providing new services for customers that can lower the costs and democratize our use of financial services. They are built on innovation and create many new jobs. Europe are on the forefront when it comes to fintechs, which is not maybe the case when we talk about tech in general, where the biggest success stories come from the US and also China. But fintechs in Europe attract a lot of funding, and in June this year, Europe has already broke the record for annual investments into fintechs. Some of the most successful companies comes from Sweden, Germany, and France. So my question would be, how does the EU Commission work to promote more innovation and competitiveness in the financial sector so that EU can become a world leading within the sector? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine from Sweden. And we have Madam Marian, I think is, I can see you there now. There you are. Go ahead.
Thank you, but colleague Sipko asked same question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's a great relief. Luca Jair, you have a question in, please.
Thank you, President. I'm here. I'm very happy to see you in person, dear Mairead. I couldn't congratulate you personally when you took office in October. I was leaving, and I take the opportunity first to congratulate you for your job, and I'm more than sure that for your personal quality, you will be capable to make closer the citizen interest, the SME, the professional, the cooperative, what is on the field, to this very technical and very complex world of finance. Because finally, as someone has said, This will concern protecting savings of citizens and people and granting an equal and fair access to credit for everyone. Of course, today your main task is concerning the green financing strategy, and many questions you have already took on this. But I want to go to two other issues that you also mentioned in your speech, and one is an old dossier, still waiting for be completed. That is the banking union. So my question is very direct. What do you think will be the concrete step in the months to come concerning the common backstop, the simple resolution fund, you deposit insurance scheme, because this also concern to make sustainable the infrastructure of Europe today for the recovery and tomorrow for next crisis. The second question is, you are also in charge between your task to develop a new private-public fund for public offering for SMEs. The question is, do you think that the Juncker scheme after EFSI and InvestEU could be the example, the benchmark to build up this one, or you have something different in mind? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to go to my colleague from Ireland, John Comer, and it is our final question.
Thank you very much indeed, President. And there is many questions, and I hope our Commissioner has a good memory, and I wish her luck. I would like to also, as an Irish colleague and a friend of Mairead, publicly congratulate her on becoming Commissioner, and we hadn't the opportunity to meet because of the pandemic, and wish her luck with a very, very important portfolio. I guess financial stability and financial services and the capital markets, and incorporated into that, I think financial stability is going to be of critical importance, and the growing gap between the rich and the poor and the services available to them. A lot of questions have been asked, and I would just one point to make to support my colleague also, Baiba, in terms of the non-performing loans. I'm not particularly happy with it. I'm not so sure that the definition is clear, and I know it leads to many, many anomalies in member states. Because during the boom, a lot of people with good solid businesses took out loans to borrow separate, and there's no definition or no distinction made. So you could have a very good business that is performing, but you have legacy debt that isn't taken account of, and the banks are now being forced to close it down as a non-performing loan, and in so by default they're also shutting down the good part of the business. So it's not completely clear that it's making sense to me. So I won't indulge any more of your time, and thank you very much, President. Back to you.
No, thank you very much, John, for that. Well, we need never be accused in Group 3 of not being interested in finances after that. There's a lot of questions there, and I hope, Commissioner Mairead, you have some knowledge of remembering them all, but I do appreciate the questions given. So, Mairead, the floor is yours. Oh, sorry, I forgot one. Sorry, Chris. Very quickly, please.
Thank you, President. Really, very, very quickly. I'm a president of the study group in this house for digital levy, and I know that the U.S. Treasury Secretary is in town or will come to Brussels. What is the future of that project? Would it have any influence on the project? This visit from the USA. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Okay, thank you very much for that. Mairead, whenever you're ready.
Well, thank you all very much. You are a very energetic group. I have 15 questions and I have run out of time to respond, but I really want to try and respect, if not the actual question, the theme. So let me begin with non-performing loans, because this is a very emotive issue, legacy issues with the past crisis. However, this crisis that we are currently facing, which has not become a banking crisis because of the fiscal supports and the ECB policy, what we are really working hard to make sure is that we don't have a financial crisis. And I think the truth is, if we leave non-performing loans on bank balance sheets, then we will have a credit crisis. So there is a need to act. The first duty of banks and borrower is to talk to each other early and often to find a solution. I made that point in December when I launched the strategy, and I repeat it now. My concern today is around those businesses that are vulnerable but viable. And we need to find a way to make sure, particularly in the tourism and hospitality sector, that they have a bridge to a future so that they do not suffer because of the consequences of a public health crisis. So that is key. But I think our work on trying to develop European secondary markets for non-performing loans is important so that we also and very strongly protect the borrower in all of this. We all know in the past, and I was a politician, of cases where this was not the result, where borrowers were not looked after, and we will not and do not want to see that happen in this case. The second issue I want to address is a general question around the very important work that's happening at the G20 and the OECD level on taxation. When I was in the European Parliament, I made the point that the world has changed and continues to change, and that our citizens are demanding action around a sense in which very large companies can move between jurisdictions or at least avoid paying a fair share of tax. This is a citizens' issue. I think the work at OECD level is very important, and I will do no more than quote my colleague who is responsible for this area, who is probably still celebrating, Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni, Italian, of course, that the G20 endorsement of this unprecedented global agreement on corporate tax is supported by 132 jurisdictions. A bold step has been taken. And indeed, he's right in saying that one that very few people thought would happen within such a short space of time. And he describes this, and I support, as a victory for tax fairness, for social justice, and the multilateral system. But, and I agree with him totally, our work is not done. And I think we are all looking to the US to see what will happen there. I will be meeting Secretary Yellen this afternoon, and I will raise the digital levy issue that you have just asked the question on. So I think this is a work in progress, and I think it is work that our citizens want to see some resolution of. Let me then move towards other issues around apologies here, sustainable finance, the issue of agriculture and forestry. So I, as a member of the European Parliament, voted in 2019 for the EU taxonomy regulation. And this is a classification system for what is economically sustainable. I did not know then, but I know now, that I would be charged with launching the taxonomy specifically in relation to climate, so climate mitigation and adoption. We cover about 80% of economic activities in the current draft that is with the co-legislators for their assessment. And we did not please everyone, which perhaps speaks to maybe we've got it right. I know there are very divided views on forestry, and I very much appreciate the concerns of our Nordic member states and citizens around this issue. And perhaps we all need to understand that, and I said this at the outset, nothing is going to stay as it is today for every sector and for every citizen. And therefore, when we are introducing these, we need to communicate the why and the implications. So for me, the details on forestry, I think, are appropriate. I think they will, in some cases, cause some anxiety until people realise that they're not quite as exacting. There is more a worry than a reality, and I would ask people to consider it in that respect. I took a decision not to include agriculture in the first draft delegated act because the Common Agriculture Policy reforms were ongoing. But we will come to that in due course, probably before the end of the year, and we will have to deal with the difficult issues of nuclear and gas. So the taxonomy, finally, is a living document. Europe has led in this space. Ours is the first globally, and both the UK, the US, others are looking at the work we're doing, and we're working at the international level to make sure that we are not alone, because if Europe alone tries to tackle the climate crisis, we will fail. We need the world to be on board with us. So what I would ask for those sectors that are fearful, so are SMEs fearful, is to say that really there is only one direction of travel here, and that is towards sustainability. And maybe we need to look at this as the opportunity. So SMEs, rather than being fearful, because we're not forcing them to do anything, this is a taxonomy that is neutral. you can decide to be in that direction of sustainability or not. But I would ask businesses large and small to see the taxonomy as a management tool, to show you how you can transition towards being sustainable. And last week we announced that we will be looking at a transitional taxonomy, because at the moment it is perhaps too binary. So we are sensitive to the issues that have been raised by the taxonomy. One colleague asked about the social taxonomy. I think it was mentioned by two colleagues. And very clearly says, yes, we will have a report by the end of this year. We have to be conscious that we can't make decisions until we see the report, and we would have an impact assessment. But E, S and G are 3 words, not one, and therefore there will have to be a recognition of the social. I think equally around sustainability, we are going to have to look at supply chains internally in the European Union and externally for all our sectors. I've always said, when it came to Brexit, for example, the member state that I know best, because it would be the worst impacted, urged businesses to look at their supply chains and to see where they were vulnerable and where they needed to build resilience. It was a really good exercise. And I would suggest that businesses, large and small, should use this moment to review supply chains, identify vulnerabilities and make changes to their management structures. So in other words, use it as something that can be positive rather than negative. As I look then towards Elena, you raised the issue of keep the receipts. Wise counsel, I have to say. It feeds into this overall approach, which I would like to see with citizens, of understanding the dynamics of the financial system and the importance of saving or investing. And that's an issue, I have to say, where we need a lot of work to do in our Capital Markets Union. Our banks are very heavy with deposits from people who are working but not spending. This money earns nothing. Why is it not being invested? And we have a challenge here to deliver on that. Specifically on Next Generation EU, which is a very major development for the European Union, a very appropriate response to a serious crisis. But we know that the money will have to be repaid. Equally, we know that the capital markets, the financial markets, want to subscribe to these funds because of their security. And we will be putting in place proposals on own resources. And we will be talking to citizens about this, because there is no magic to money. And there is a need to borrow and repay. So if you have concerns, I don't think that I would share them on the basis of we will provide for repayments. The separate issue, and there will be a very big discussion, I'm sure you'll have it here, around the Stability and Growth Pact. So our rules at the moment are, in abeyance. What for the future? How will we integrate social, environmental? Will we have the same debates between and in member states, and how will we come to a solution? And I'm asking that question, and I won't answer it today, but that will come in due course. In relation to a line that was used a few times, I think, about banks and protecting savings. The lesson we learned from the last financial crisis was the need for a strong crisis management mechanism, so that taxpayers did not become the bailout for banks. We do have a crisis management framework. We perhaps need to have a look at whether it is fit for purpose, but our clear resolve is to make sure that where and if there are crises in the banking system in the future, that it does not come back to the taxpayer to carry the bill. And I would emphasise that as being a key priority, as it was in the past, certainly it is for me today. Some comments around the future of finance generally, because it is interesting that digitalisation and money are now mixing together. Very interesting comments from all of you. I have raised publicly the need for an ideas forum. We talk about open banking. We're moving to open finance, where financial data will be really important as long as the citizen controls it. So the flow of data between banks, financial institutions and fintechs. And then there are big techs, which I'm not sure got much of a mention. So we want innovation. We want fintechs to survive and grow. We also know they will provide partially some services that the banks currently are. The question is, how does this impact on our traditional banking infrastructure? Will the client of a bank go to a bank for one piece of a service and go to fintechs for another? And what about the desire, as we understand it, from big techs to enter into the financial field? where they have access immediately to a lot of citizens' information. And that has led to conversations not just in Europe, but globally on digital euro, which again we need to discuss, which is not just a technical exercise, but very much a political one that will evolve in time. And I think there is a lot of discussion about the timing of this and the consequence of it, because as I see the evolution of digital currencies, and I've read a lot about them, including the recent document from the UK, we don't even have all the questions about the implications of digital euro, then let alone answers. So we have to be thoughtful, but it is no doubt clear to me that the direction of travel is in the digital space, but that needs to be monitored really effectively. You will remind me, President, if I've missed anything. I want to acknowledge the role of the consumers' organisation here and your concern around non-performing loans, but I hope my comments will reassure you. And indeed, I know that between Buick, perhaps, and some of the colleagues who raise the land use sector, there are differences of opinion, which is how Europe functions and how we come to conclusions. In relation to the science-based issue, yes, the taxonomy is science-based, but we also have to make sure it's practical, that it can be implemented. Excuse me, can I just say to Giuseppe how impressed I am that you joined us and that you were wide awake. And can I say congratulations? Is that allowed? I stayed up far too late watching football. And look, enjoyed the celebrations. I think what sport brings to life is how important social is to society and how key that is. I see the colleague who asked specific questions. And I can't recall your name. If you
kickbacks on financial advice.
Thank you, because I have an answer here. First of all, as to whether we're looking at the banning of inducements. Right now, we're carrying out a study, and everything is on the table, because there is some concern that inducements skew the advice that is given. So we know that as individuals, we want advice that meets our criteria. So if we're interested in sustainability or long-term, that the person giving the advice takes account. So I would just say to you, be very reassured. We're conscious of the potential for inducements to influence advice, and therefore we are looking at this as a very crucial issue. You did have another separate question, if memory serves me right, which was around the social taxonomy, and I hope I addressed that in my remarks. Lastly, maybe to pull things together, I suppose any more than I knew that I would be in this job 9 or 10 months ago, the world is evolving and changing very, very quickly and very dramatically. I think there is a role on all of us to make sure that our citizens both understand and are part of the journey, and that we leave no one behind. Those are the most important words, but they will be the most difficult to honour, because we know that the impact of COVID, both within member states and between member states, has been very different. Some industries and sectors have had a really good pandemic, which is, the world has not stopped for them. Others who are very viable, small businesses, family businesses, have had the rug pulled from under them and are suffering. And therefore, we have to be very conscious in the recovery phase, where we're financing the recovery, that we make sure to take account of the different starting points. But we are coming out of a crisis, colleagues, and I think it would be very remiss of us to simply accept that we go back to the status quo. This, in my view, is not acceptable. We have to use this crisis to change for the better. And I think all of us are behind that and should support that, because if we only go back to the status quo, it means we will be going in reverse, and that cannot be tenable nor correct. I wanted to address my good friend, but I can't find the question, Luca Javier. My sincere apologies. It was here somewhere, but I cannot. I do have it here. The protection of savings you mentioned and all the crisis management, the next steps in banking union. I'll be quite blunt here. When I took over this role, everybody that I met was in favour of banking union and the capital markets union. So I thought this is an easy one. We'll deliver that within a few weeks. But of course, What people want and what they will do to achieve that takes some more time. So the president of the Eurogroup worked hard and tried to advance banking union. He now has another 6 months to do that. The Commissioner reflecting on what we will do in relation to banking union, and we have proposals already out there, and we have to decide whether we leave them or whether we change direction. On the SME IPO issue, we will have a proposal by the end of this year, but what this speaks to is the need to make sure that SMEs have access to finance, because it's the lifeblood of businesses. And the truth is we need to give SMEs alternatives to banking finance. They need access to equity capital. And we need a mindset and a cultural change, which I intend to pursue. But I would say to member states, and perhaps use your influence, that we need to look at issues around insolvency, around legislation, to try and harmonise what's happening, because this is a barrier. Also withholding tax issues, these are barriers. But my experience of Europe, which began in 2004 as a politician, but which started, because I remember when my member state joined the EESC, and I work as a journalist, is that everything that Europe achieves is usually done when there's a difficulty, when we are faced with the most difficult moments. Like the Commission was faced with the pandemic, trying to pull member states together around protective equipment supplies, around vaccination supplies. In the beginning, a really difficult time for Europe, but the determination of the Commission led by President Ursula von der Leyen was absolute. And in fact, if you look today, we can be very proud that during this crisis, the European Union exported half of what was produced in Europe to 90 countries globally, as well as supplying 70% of supplies required within the European Union. So while there will be criticisms about Europe, and we will have a conference on the future of it, I would urge all of us to remember what we have today as Europeans, because sometimes you kind of bank that and forget, and then look to the future with all of the challenges. We, at least in Europe, have resources and capacity to make the changes. So let's face into this daunting but brighter future together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I do appreciate the translators who really have gone over time, and I always appreciate the hard work they do. So, Commissioner, can I thank you sincerely for your comments this morning, for your extraordinary command of all of the questions, which I think you nearly got around to all of, and to you, members of Group 3, who participated so enthusiastically and engaged in the subject. I think we have a lot to say and do about this, and in this committee you will be hearing, I'm sure, and indeed Group 3, a lot more of us, Commissioner. So I will end, just give a good round of applause to the translators.